The autumn wind swept through the golden corridors of Aldoria Palace, carrying with it the scent of rain and the whispers of palace servants who had grown accustomed to the tension that seemed to permeate every stone wall. Princess Isabella Victoria stood at the tall window of her private chambers, watching the gardens below, where groundskeepers tended to the last blooming roses of the season. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman of 28, with auburn hair carefully arranged in an elegant chignon and emerald eyes that held both grace and determination. Today marked the 3rd anniversary of her marriage to Crown Prince Alexander, heir to the throne of Aldoria, and yet the celebration felt more like a political maneuver than a romantic milestone. The kingdom had watched their courtship and wedding with great interest, as Isabella had been chosen not just for her noble lineage from the neighboring kingdom of Valenhall, but for her reputation as an educated, compassionate woman who could modernize the monarchy while respecting its traditions. However, what the public did not see were the subtle battles waged within the palace walls, particularly between Isabella and Queen Regent Margareta, Alexander's stepmother who had married the late King Edmund 5 years before his death. Margareta had assumed the role of Queen Mother with the kind of authority that suggested she had no intention of stepping aside when Alexander eventually took the throne. At 52, she was a formidable woman with silver blonde hair always perfectly styled, sharp blue eyes that seemed to calculate every interaction, and a smile that could cut glass when she was displeased. The morning had begun like many others, with Isabella reviewing her schedule with her private secretary, Lady Caroline Ashworth, an intelligent woman in her 30s who had served the royal family for over a decade. Caroline had a gift for reading the political undercurrents of palace life, and her loyalty to Isabella was absolute, though she maintained the diplomatic facade required for survival in court. "Your Royal Highness," Caroline began, consulting her leather-bound appointment book, "the Charity Gala Planning Committee meeting has been moved to the Blue Drawing Room at 11 o'clock. Queen Regent Margareta has requested that the meeting focus on traditional protocols rather than the modernized approach you had suggested." Isabella sighed softly, turning from the window to face Caroline. "Of course she has. Did she provide specific objections to our proposals, or is this simply another exercise in asserting her authority?" Caroline's expression remained diplomatically neutral, though her eyes conveyed understanding. Her Majesty expressed concerns about maintaining the dignity and traditions that have guided royal charitable endeavors for generations. She feels that some of your suggestions might be too informal for the monarchy's image. The charitable gala in question was meant to raise funds for education initiatives in rural Aldoria, a cause close to Isabella's heart. She had spent months researching modern fundraising techniques, studying how other contemporary monarchies had successfully adapted their charitable works to reach broader audiences and generate greater impact. Her proposals included interactive displays, involvement of young beneficiaries sharing their stories, and a less formal reception style that would encourage genuine engagement rather than stuffy networking. Margareta's opposition came as no surprise. Since Isabella's arrival at court, every initiative she had proposed faced similar resistance, always couched in language about tradition and propriety, but clearly designed to limit her influence and maintain the status quo that kept Margareta firmly in control of royal affairs. The irony was not lost on Isabella that Alexander, who would one day rule this kingdom, seemed largely oblivious to these power struggles. He loved his stepmother, who had been a stabilizing presence during his turbulent teenage years following his father's death, and he adored his wife. But he appeared incapable of recognizing that these two important women in his life were engaged in a careful war of attrition for influence over the future direction of the monarchy. At precisely 11 o'clock, Isabella made her way through the palace corridors toward the Blue Drawing Room. The walls were lined with portraits of previous monarchs, their painted eyes seeming to watch her progress with either approval or judgment, depending on her mood. Today, they felt particularly scrutinizing, as if they too were weighing her worthiness to eventually become their successor in these halls. The Blue Drawing Room was one of the smaller formal reception areas in the palace, decorated in soft shades of blue and gold with French furniture that dated back 2 centuries. When Isabella entered, she found the charity committee already assembled. Lady Margaret Thornfield, the elderly chairman whose family had organized royal charitable events for 3 generations. Mrs. Victoria Pemberton, wife of the Minister of Education, and a sharp woman who understood both politics and practical charity work. Lord James Whitmore, the palace's chief protocol officer, whose knowledge of royal precedent was encyclopedic, and Queen Regent Margareta, seated at the head of the ornate table as if this were a cabinet meeting rather than a planning session for a charity event. Princess Isabella, Margareta said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. How lovely that you could join us. We were just discussing the importance of maintaining certain standards in our royal charitable endeavors. Isabella took her designated seat, noting that it placed her at the opposite end of the table from Margareta, forcing her to project her voice to be heard clearly. Good morning, everyone. I'm eager to hear how we can make this year's gala the most successful yet, both in terms of funds raised and awareness generated for education in rural communities. Lady Thornfield, a woman in her 70s with white hair and kind eyes, nodded approvingly. Your enthusiasm is commendable, Your Royal Highness. However, we must balance innovation with the dignity that our donors expect from royal events. Mrs. Pemberton leaned forward slightly, her expression thoughtful. If I may, Your Royal Highness, some of your proposed changes do have merit. The Education Ministry has seen great success with programs that allow beneficiaries to share their stories directly. It creates emotional connection and often leads to increased long-term support. Lord Whitmore cleared his throat, a sound Isabella had learned usually preceded a recitation of historical precedent. While innovation has its place, we must consider that royal charitable events serve multiple purposes. They raise funds, yes, but they also demonstrate the monarchy's stability and continuity. Too much change too quickly can send unintended messages about the institution itself. Margareta nodded sagely, as if Lord Whitmore had articulated her exact thoughts. Our role is to be stewards of tradition while providing steady, reliable support for worthy causes. The monarchy's strength lies in its consistency, not in chasing every modern trend. Isabella felt the familiar frustration rising in her chest, but she kept her voice measured and respectful. I understand the importance of tradition, but I would argue that the monarchy's greatest strength lies in its ability to evolve while maintaining its core values. If we fail to connect with contemporary audiences, particularly younger generations, we risk becoming irrelevant to the very people we seek to serve. The room fell silent for a moment, and Isabella could feel the weight of everyone's attention. She had spoken more directly than usual, and she could see calculations happening behind several pairs of eyes. Mrs. Pemberton was the first to speak. The princess makes an excellent point. Our donor demographics have been shifting younger in recent years, and events that embrace some modern elements tend to be more successful in both attendance and fundraising. Lady Thornfield nodded slowly. Perhaps we could find a middle ground, maintain the formal reception and traditional auction, but incorporate some of the educational displays the princess suggested. Lord Whitmore looked uncomfortable, glancing between Isabella and Margareta. Any modifications would need to be carefully reviewed to ensure they align with royal protocol standards. Margareta's smile became more pronounced, though her eyes remained calculating. Of course we must be thorough. Perhaps Princess Isabella could prepare a detailed proposal, and Lord Whitmore could review it against historical precedent. We wouldn't want to accidentally compromise the dignity of the crown. Isabella recognized the maneuver immediately. By requiring extensive documentation and review processes, Margareta was effectively ensuring that any changes would be minimal and heavily diluted by the time they received approval. It was a masterful political move, appearing reasonable while actually maintaining complete control. That sounds like a practical approach, Isabella replied diplomatically, though internally she was already planning how to present her ideas in a way that would be harder to dismiss or significantly alter. The meeting continued for another hour with discussions about catering, musical entertainment, and guest lists. Throughout these conversations, Isabella noticed how Margareta managed to position herself as the final authority on all decisions, despite Isabella technically holding equal rank in the planning process. Every suggestion was filtered through Margareta's preferences, and any proposal that differed from previous year's events was subjected to extensive discussion about potential risks and complications. As the meeting concluded, Lady Thornfield approached Isabella with a warm smile. Your Royal Highness, I hope you won't be discouraged by the cautious approach we sometimes take. Change in institutions like ours tends to happen gradually. but it does happen. Isabella appreciated the older woman's kindness and wisdom. Thank you, Lady Thornfield. I understand that patience is required, though I confess I'm eager to see the monarchy contribute to positive change in people's lives as effectively as possible. Mrs. Pemberton joined them, lowering her voice slightly. If I may suggest, Your Royal Highness, sometimes the most effective approach is to frame new ideas in terms of their connection to historical precedent. Lord Whitmore and Her Majesty respond well to proposals that can be shown to have roots in royal tradition, even if the implementation is contemporary. This advice proved invaluable, as Isabella realized she had been approaching her initiatives as departures from tradition rather than as evolutions of historical royal charity work. Perhaps she could research how previous generations of royals had innovated within their own contemporary contexts, and frame her proposals as continuing that legacy of thoughtful adaptation. After the other committee members departed, Isabella found herself alone in the blue drawing room with Margareta. The Queen Regent was gathering her papers with deliberate precision, and Isabella sensed an opportunity for a more direct conversation. Your Majesty, Isabella began carefully, I hope you know that my suggestions come from a genuine desire to honor the monarchy while ensuring its continued relevance and effectiveness. Margareta looked up with an expression that was difficult to read. My dear Isabella, I have no doubt about your good intentions. However, good intentions must be balanced with wisdom and experience. The monarchy has survived for centuries because it has maintained certain standards and approaches. Rapid change, no matter how well-intentioned, can destabilize institutions that depend on public trust and respect. There was truth in Margareta's words, Isabella had to admit. The monarchy did depend on public perception, and dramatic changes could indeed be problematic. However, she also believed that gradual stagnation posed equal risks, particularly as society continued to evolve around them. I appreciate your perspective, Isabella replied. Perhaps we could work together more closely on future initiatives. Your experience, combined with fresh approaches, might create the most effective outcomes. Margareta's smile returned, though it remained carefully controlled. Of course, my dear. I'm always available to provide guidance. After all, we both want what's best for the crown and for Alexander's future reign. As Isabella left the blue drawing room, she reflected on the complex dynamics that governed palace life. Margareta was not malicious exactly, but she was protective of her position, and genuinely believed that her approach was correct. The challenge lay in finding ways to introduce necessary changes while respecting the legitimate concerns about stability and tradition that Margareta represented. That evening, Isabella dined privately with Alexander in their shared apartments. The Crown Prince was a handsome man of 31, with dark hair, warm brown eyes, and the kind of easy charm that made him genuinely popular with the public. However, his strengths as a future king did not necessarily translate to awareness of the subtle political maneuvering that occurred within his own household. How did the gala planning meeting go? Alexander asked, cutting into his roasted duck with the casual air of someone who expected pleasant news. Isabella chose her words carefully. It was productive. We're working through some differences in approach, but everyone is committed to making the event successful. Alexander nodded approvingly. Margareta mentioned she's pleased with how seriously you're taking the charitable work. She says you're really beginning to understand the importance of royal traditions. This interpretation of the morning's events was so different from Isabella's experience that she paused before responding. The charity work is indeed important to me. I'm learning a great deal about how royal events can be most effective. That's wonderful, Alexander said, reaching across to squeeze her hand affectionately. I knew you and Margareta would work well together once you both had time to adjust. She has such valuable experience, and you bring fresh energy. It's the perfect combination. Isabella smiled and squeezed his hand in return, though internally she marveled at his ability to see harmony where she experienced constant, subtle conflict. Perhaps this was a necessary trait for a future king, the ability to assume the best of people and situations, but it sometimes left him blind to the realities of power dynamics around him. After dinner, as Alexander reviewed briefing papers for his upcoming state visits, Isabella found herself back at her chamber window, looking out at the palace gardens now shrouded in evening mist. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to navigate the complex waters of royal life, She was learning that being a princess required not just grace and public service, but political acumen and strategic thinking that would have impressed diplomats and generals. The path forward was becoming clearer, though no less complicated. She would need to build alliances carefully, present her ideas strategically, and demonstrate that innovation and tradition could coexist successfully. Most importantly, she would need to prove that her vision for the monarchy's future was not a threat to its stability, but rather the key to ensuring its continued relevance and effectiveness in serving the people of Aldoria. As she prepared for bed, Isabella reflected on Lady Thornfield's words about patience and gradual change. Perhaps the elderly woman was right, and lasting transformation required time and careful cultivation rather than dramatic gestures. The monarchy had indeed survived for centuries by adapting slowly to changing times, while maintaining its essential character. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to demonstrate that evolution and tradition could work hand in hand, creating a stronger, more effective royal institution for future generations. The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of the palace library, casting colorful patterns across the ancient wooden tables where Princess Isabella had spread out historical documents and photographs from previous royal charitable events. She had arrived early, before the palace staff began their daily routines, seeking both solitude and inspiration from the extensive archives that documented centuries of royal public service. Mrs. Pemberton's advice about framing innovations within historical context had sparked an idea that kept Isabella awake much of the night. If she could demonstrate that royal adaptation had always been part of the monarchy's strength, perhaps she could present her proposals not as departures from tradition, but as continuations of a long-established pattern of thoughtful evolution. The leather-bound volumes before her contained fascinating details about how previous generations of Aldorian royals had responded to the challenges and opportunities of their times. Queen Adelaide, who had ruled in the early 1800s, had revolutionized royal charitable work by personally visiting hospitals and workhouses, scandalizing the court, but ultimately changing public perception of the monarchy's role in social welfare. Prince Maximilian had introduced educational initiatives in the 1920s that were considered radical at the time, but had become cornerstone programs still operating today. Most intriguingly, Isabella discovered that Queen Margareta herself, during her early years as queen consort to the late King Edmund, had implemented several innovations that were now considered traditional elements of royal events. The inclusion of musical performances by scholarship recipients, the practice of inviting prominent educators to speak at charitable functions, and even the format of the annual education gala itself had all been Margareta's ideas, introduced gradually over her years as queen. This revelation shifted Isabella's understanding of her current situation significantly. Margareta was not inherently opposed to change. She was protective of changes she had implemented and wanted to ensure that any new modifications maintained the dignity and effectiveness she had worked to establish. Perhaps the key was not to position her proposals as replacements for Margareta's approaches, but as logical extensions of the foundation Margareta had already built. Lady Caroline arrived at the library as Isabella was making notes on particularly relevant historical precedents. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness. I thought I might find you here." "You missed breakfast in the family dining room." Isabella looked up from a photograph of Queen Margareta presenting awards to young students in 1998, noting how genuinely pleased the Queen looked to be engaging with the children. "Caroline, did you know that the current format of our education gala was actually quite innovative when Queen Margareta first introduced it? She faced resistance from the court at the time, but persisted because she believed it would be more effective than previous approaches." Caroline set down a cup of tea and a plate of pastries, settling into the chair across from Isabella. "I remember hearing stories about that from some of the senior staff. Apparently, Lord Whitmore's predecessor was quite opposed to having beneficiaries speak at royal events. He felt it was too informal and might create uncomfortable situations. But Margareta pushed forward anyway, and now those personal testimonies are considered essential elements of our charitable events," Isabella mused, beginning to see a path forward. "I think I've been approaching this situation incorrectly. Instead of proposing alternatives to established practices, I should be suggesting ways to enhance and expand what's already working well." Caroline smiled knowingly. That sounds like a much more strategic approach, Your Royal Highness. Queen Margareta takes great pride in the improvements she's made to royal charitable work. If you can position your ideas as building upon her successes rather than replacing them, you might find a much more receptive audience. The insight felt like a breakthrough, and Isabella spent the next 2 hours crafting a revised proposal that highlighted connections between her suggestions and the innovations Margareta had successfully implemented years earlier. Instead of proposing interactive displays as a modern addition, she framed them as an expansion of the educational focus Margareta had introduced. Rather than suggesting a less formal reception style, she proposed enhanced engagement opportunities that would build upon the personal connection elements that Margareta had pioneered. By 10 o'clock, Isabella felt ready to test her new approach. She had arranged to meet with Lady Thornfield for a private consultation, hoping to gain the elderly woman's insights before presenting her revised ideas to the full committee. Lady Thornfield had agreed to meet in the morning room, a comfortable space decorated in warm yellows and creams that felt less formal than most palace reception areas. When Isabella arrived, she found Lady Thornfield already seated with her own cup of tea, reviewing what appeared to be correspondence from various charitable organizations. The older woman looked up with a warm smile and gestured for Isabella to join her at the small round table by the window.
Your Royal Highness, thank you for suggesting this meeting.
I confess I've been hoping for an opportunity to speak with you more privately about the charitable work. Isabella settled into her chair, feeling encouraged by Lady Thornfield's welcoming tone. I've been doing quite a bit of research into the history of our royal charitable events, and I've made some discoveries that I think might interest you. Oh? I do love historical research. Please, tell me what you found. Isabella opened her folder and showed Lady Thornfield the photograph of Queen Margareta with the students. Did you know that many of the elements we now consider traditional in our education gala were actually innovations introduced by Queen Margareta? I had no idea she had been such a pioneer in adapting royal charitable practices. Lady Thornfield's eyes lit up with recognition and pleasure. Oh yes, indeed she was. I was much younger then, of course, and I remember the debates quite clearly. There were people who thought having scholarship recipients speak publicly was too risky, that it might create awkward moments or detract from the formal dignity of the event. But it worked beautifully, and now those personal stories are often the most memorable and impactful parts of our gatherings, Isabella observed. Precisely, and that's just one example. Margareta also introduced the practice of having royal family members mingle with donors during the reception rather than maintaining strict protocol lines. She felt it created better relationships and encouraged more generous long-term support. She was quite right, as it turned out. Isabella felt her excitement building as her theory proved correct. That gives me hope that she might be open to considering some additional enhancements, especially if they can be presented as logical extensions of her successful innovations. Lady Thornfield leaned forward with interest. What sorts of enhancements are you considering? Isabella pulled out her revised proposal, noting how different it looked from her original document. Well, building on the educational focus that Queen Margareta established, I thought we might create interactive displays that allow donors to see the impact of their contributions more directly. Instead of just hearing a few speeches, they could engage with exhibits showing student work, community improvements, and program outcomes. That's actually quite brilliant, Lady Thornfield said thoughtfully. It would be like extending the personal testimony concept into a visual and interactive format. Exactly. And for the reception, rather than changing the successful format Queen Margareta developed, I'm suggesting we add some structured networking opportunities, perhaps themed discussion areas where donors with similar interests could connect with each other and with program administrators. It would build on the relationship-building foundation she established while creating even stronger connections. Lady Thornfield was nodding with increasing enthusiasm. You know, I think Queen Margareta might respond very well to this approach. She's always been proud of the improvements she made to royal charitable work, and she genuinely wants these events to be as effective as possible. If you can show her how your ideas complement and enhance what she's already accomplished, I believe you'll find her much more receptive. Encouraged by this response, Isabella spent the next hour walking through her revised proposals with Lady Thornfield. refining the language and approach based on the older woman's insights about palace politics and Margarita's preferences. By the time their meeting concluded, Isabella felt she had a much stronger foundation for the next committee meeting. However, as she was leaving the morning room, Isabella encountered an unexpected situation that would test all the diplomatic skills she had been developing. As she walked through the grand corridor toward the main staircase, she heard voices coming from the small salon, a private sitting room, typically used for informal meetings. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap she could see Queen Margarita in conversation with someone Isabella couldn't identify from her angle. Initially, Isabella intended to simply pass by quietly, respecting the privacy of Margarita's meeting. However, as she drew closer, she heard her own name mentioned and paused, uncertain whether she should interrupt or continue on her way. "Princess Isabella means well, I'm certain," Margarita was saying, "but she doesn't yet understand the delicate balance required in royal charitable work." These enthusiastic young women often have grand ideas without considering the practical implications or the potential for unintended consequences. The response came from a voice Isabella recognized as Mrs. Pook, Victoria Pemberton. "Your Majesty, I do think some of her suggestions have merit. The Education Ministry has seen real success with more interactive approaches to donor engagement." Margarita's laugh was gentle but dismissive. "My dear Victoria, you're being kind, but we both know that what works in government programs doesn't necessarily translate to royal events. The monarchy operates under different constraints and expectations. We can't simply adopt every trendy approach that catches someone's fancy." Isabella felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and frustration, but she forced herself to remain still and listen rather than react emotionally. Mrs. Pemberton's voice carried a note of mild persistence. "But surely there's room for some adaptation. The princess has done considerable research, and her proposals seem quite thoughtful." "Research is admirable," Margarita replied, "but wisdom comes from experience. I've spent decades learning how to balance innovation with tradition, how to push boundaries without crossing lines that could damage the monarchy's reputation. Isabella is intelligent, certainly, but she hasn't yet developed the judgment that comes from navigating these waters for years." There was a pause, and then Mrs. Pemberton spoke more carefully. "Your Majesty, forgive me if I'm overstepping, but might it be beneficial to work more collaboratively with the princess? Her fresh perspective combined with your experience could create something truly special." Margarita's tone became cooler. "Victoria, I appreciate your diplomatic instincts, but let me be clear, I am not opposed to collaboration. However, collaboration requires mutual respect and understanding. When someone arrives with proposals that essentially dismiss established practices in favor of untested innovations, that's not collaboration. That's disruption disguised as modernization." Isabella realized that her original approach had indeed been perceived as dismissive of Margarita's work, despite her not intending it that way. The Queen Regent felt that her contributions were being undervalued and replaced, rather than enhanced, which explained the resistance Isabella had encountered. Mrs. Pemberton made one more attempt. "Perhaps if the princess were to present her ideas differently, emphasizing how they build upon the successful foundation you've established?" "If she were to do that," Margarita said slowly, "and if she were to demonstrate genuine understanding and appreciation of what's already been accomplished, then yes, I might be more inclined to consider additional enhancements. But I won't support changes simply for the sake of change, nor will I allow well-meaning inexperience to undermine programs that have taken decades to perfect." Isabella carefully backed away from the door and continued down the corridor, her mind racing with the implications of what she had overheard. On one hand, she felt stung by Margarita's characterization of her as an enthusiastic but inexperienced young woman whose ideas were trendy rather than thoughtful. On the other hand, she now understood much more clearly what Margarita needed to see in order to become an ally rather than an obstacle. The conversation had revealed that Margarita's resistance wasn't personal animosity or a simple desire to maintain power for its own sake. Rather, it stemmed from protective feelings about programs she had worked hard to develop and a genuine concern that inexperienced good intentions could damage carefully built relationships and systems. More importantly, Mrs. Pemberton's suggestions and Margareta's responses had outlined a clear path forward. If Isabella could demonstrate genuine understanding and appreciation of Margareta's contributions while presenting her ideas as enhancements rather than replacements, she might transform an adversarial relationship into a collaborative partnership. That afternoon, Isabella requested a private meeting with Queen Margareta, suggesting they meet in Margareta's personal study rather than in a formal reception room. The study was a comfortable space filled with books, family photographs, and mementos from Margareta's years of charitable work. Isabella hoped the informal setting would encourage a more open conversation. When Margareta received her, the Queen Regent seemed curious but cautious. "Isabella, this is unexpected. I hope everything is well?" "Everything is fine, Your Majesty. I was hoping we could speak privately about the charity gala and my role in the planning process." Isabella settled into the offered chair, noting the warmth and personality that filled Margareta's private space. Margareta raised an eyebrow. "Of course. Though I thought we had covered the relevant points in yesterday's meeting." Isabella took a breath, knowing this conversation could determine the success or failure of her future initiatives. "Actually, I wanted to discuss something I should have addressed from the beginning. I've been researching the history of our charitable events, and I've learned a great deal about the innovations you introduced during your early years as queen. I had no idea how significantly you had modernized and improved the royal approach to charitable work." The change in Margareta's expression was subtle but noticeable. Her posture softened slightly, and genuine interest replaced the polite wariness in her eyes. "I'm embarrassed to admit," Isabella continued, "that I presented my suggestions without properly acknowledging or building upon the foundation you had already established. I think I may have inadvertently given the impression that I wanted to replace your approaches rather than enhance them, and I sincerely apologize for that oversight." Margareta was quiet for a moment, studying Isabella's face as if trying to determine the sincerity of her words. Finally, she spoke. "I see. And what exactly did you learn about those early innovations?" Isabella pulled out the photographs and documents she had found, sharing what she had discovered about Margareta's introduction of personal testimonies, modified reception formats, and educational focuses that had been considered radical at the time. As she spoke, she watched Margareta's expression shift from skepticism to surprise to something approaching pleasure.
"You really did your research," Margareta said finally, picking up one of the photographs and smiling slightly at the image of her younger self with the scholarship recipients.
"I remember that day quite clearly. Lord Whitmore's predecessor was convinced it would be a disaster having children speak publicly at a royal event. But you persisted because you believed it would be more effective than traditional approaches," Isabella said. "And you were absolutely right. Those personal connections have become one of the most powerful elements of our events." Margareta nodded, still looking at the photograph. "It wasn't easy to convince people that change could strengthen rather than weaken our charitable work. There were many who felt that any departure from established protocol was inherently risky. Which makes your success even more impressive," Isabella said genuinely, "and it gives me hope that you might consider some additional enhancements that could build upon what you've accomplished." Margareta set down the photograph and looked directly at Isabella. "What sorts of enhancements?" For the next hour, Isabella presented her revised proposals, carefully explaining how each suggestion connected to and extended Margareta's successful innovations. She watched as the Queen Regent's initial skepticism gradually gave way to interest and then to active engagement with the ideas. "The interactive displays are intriguing," Margareta admitted. "They would certainly provide more detailed information about program impacts than speeches alone can accomplish. And they would showcase the educational focus you established, while giving donors more opportunities to understand how their contributions create real change," Isabella added. By the end of their conversation, Margareta had agreed to support a pilot version of several proposals, with the understanding that they would be carefully implemented and evaluated for effectiveness before becoming permanent additions to future events. As Isabella left Margareta's study, she reflected on the day's lessons about patience, diplomacy, and the importance of understanding other perspectives before pursuing change. The path to meaningful innovation within established institutions required not just good ideas, but the political skill to present those ideas in ways that honored existing contributions while creating space for growth. More importantly, She had learned that Queen Margareta was not an obstacle to progress, but rather a guardian of hard-won improvements, who needed reassurance that new changes would strengthen, rather than undermine the foundation she had built. With this understanding, Isabella felt optimistic about the possibility of creating a truly collaborative partnership that could benefit both the monarchy and the people they served. The morning of the charity gala arrived with the crisp clarity of late autumn, and Princess Isabella stood before her dressing mirror as her lady-in-waiting, Sophie, carefully arranged the sapphire and diamond tiara that had belonged to her grandmother. The past 6 weeks since her breakthrough conversation with Queen Margareta had been a whirlwind of planning, coordination, and careful diplomacy as their collaborative approach to the enhanced gala format took shape. The results of their partnership had exceeded Isabella's most optimistic expectations. Working together, they had created an event that honored traditional royal charitable practices while incorporating meaningful innovations that would provide donors with deeper engagement and more comprehensive understanding of the education programs they supported. The interactive displays had been designed with input from both royal protocol officers and education ministry specialists, ensuring they met standards for dignity while maximizing impact. "Your Royal Highness, you look radiant," Sophie said, stepping back to admire her work. "The sapphire blue complements your gown beautifully, and the tiara catches the light perfectly." Isabella smiled at her reflection, noting that she did indeed look the part of a princess ready to host a significant royal event. Her gown was an elegant creation in midnight blue silk, designed with a classical silhouette that honored royal tradition while incorporating subtle contemporary elements in the beadwork that caught the light as she moved. More importantly, she felt confident and prepared, knowing that the evening ahead represented not just a successful charitable event, but a new model for how royal initiatives could evolve while maintaining their essential character. The past weeks had transformed her relationship with Margareta in ways that extended far beyond the gala planning. Once they had established a foundation of mutual respect and shared objectives, they had discovered that their different perspectives and experiences created a powerful synergy. Margareta's deep understanding of donor relationships and palace politics, combined with Isabella's research skills and fresh insights, had produced innovations that neither could have developed independently. Lady Caroline knocked softly before entering, carrying the final guest list and evening schedule. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness. I have the updated numbers from the reception manager. We have full attendance confirmed, including several new major donors who specifically requested invitations after hearing about the enhanced format." This news pleased Isabella enormously, as it suggested that their approach was indeed attracting broader support for the educational programs. "Wonderful. And the displays are all prepared?" "Yes, Your Royal Highness. The exhibition team finished the final installations yesterday evening. Queen Margareta reviewed them this morning and expressed her complete satisfaction with how they turned out." Isabella felt a warm glow of accomplishment at this news. Margareta's approval meant more to her now than it would have months earlier, when she had seen the Queen Regent primarily as an obstacle to overcome. Now she understood that Margareta's standards were high because she genuinely cared about the effectiveness and dignity of royal charitable work, and earning her respect felt like a significant achievement. The morning progressed with final preparations and briefings. Isabella met with the scholarship recipients who would be speaking during the formal program, helping them feel comfortable with the royal protocol while encouraging them to share their stories authentically. She reviewed logistics with the catering staff, ensuring that the enhanced reception format would flow smoothly between different engagement areas. Most importantly, she participated in a final walkthrough with Margareta, Lord Whitmore, and the senior event staff to confirm that every detail met their collective standards. During this walkthrough, Isabella was struck by how seamlessly she and Margareta now worked together. Where once there had been tension and careful diplomatic maneuvering, there was now genuine collaboration and shared problem-solving. When they discovered that one of the interactive displays might create a bottleneck in guest flow, they quickly redesigned the layout together, combining Margareta's knowledge of donor behavior with Isabella's understanding of the exhibit content to create a better solution. "I believe this will be our most successful education gala yet," Margareta said as they completed their review. "The enhanced elements you've developed should provide donors with much more comprehensive understanding of program impacts, while the traditional elements I've been refining over the years will ensure proper dignity and relationship building." Lord Whitmore, who had initially been skeptical of any changes to established protocols, nodded his agreement. The careful integration of new elements with proven approaches has created something that maintains royal standards while offering genuine innovation. I believe this model could serve as a template for future royal charitable events. This endorsement from Lord Whitmore felt particularly significant, as Isabella had learned that his approval was considered essential for any modifications to royal protocols. His recognition that their collaborative approach had produced something worthy of replication suggested that their work had implications beyond this single event. As afternoon approached, Isabella took time for a private lunch with Alexander, wanting to share her excitement about the evening, while also ensuring he understood his role in the enhanced program format. The Crown Prince had been supportive throughout the planning process, though his focus on his upcoming state visits had limited his direct involvement in the detailed preparations.
I'm genuinely impressed by what you and Margareta have accomplished, Alexander said as they dined in their private quarters. When you first mentioned wanting to modify the gala format, I was concerned about potential complications, but you've managed to create innovations that everyone seems excited about. Isabella appreciated his recognition, though she was also curious about his initial concerns. What kinds of complications were you worried about? Alexander considered his words carefully. Well, royal charitable events serve multiple purposes beyond just raising funds. They demonstrate the monarchy's stability and competence. They maintain important donor relationships, and they showcase our commitment to the causes we support. Any changes risk disrupting one or more of those functions, even with the best intentions. This insight helped Isabella understand why Margareta had been initially resistant to her proposals, and why the collaborative approach had been so much more effective than her original attempts at reform. I think I understand now why it was so important to build upon existing successes rather than proposing wholesale changes. Exactly. And from what I've seen, you and Margareta have found ways to enhance all of those functions rather than risking any of them. The interactive displays should demonstrate our program's effectiveness more clearly than traditional approaches. The enhanced reception format should strengthen donor relationships, and the overall quality should reflect well on the monarchy's capabilities. As evening approached, Isabella felt a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation that reminded her of her wedding day 3 years earlier. Like her wedding, this event represented not just a single occasion, but a demonstration of her readiness to assume greater responsibilities within the royal family and the broader kingdom. The gala was being held in the palace's grand ballroom, a magnificent space with crystal chandeliers, gilded moldings, and tall windows that overlooked the formal gardens. As guests began to arrive, Isabella took her position in the receiving line alongside Alexander and Margareta, greeting each donor personally and expressing genuine appreciation for their continued support of educational initiatives. The enhanced reception format became apparent immediately, as guests moved naturally between traditional networking areas and the new interactive displays that showed detailed information about program outcomes, student achievements, and community impact. Isabella watched with satisfaction as donors spent significantly longer examining the exhibits than they typically devoted to simple conversation, and she could see genuine engagement and interest in their expressions and questions. Pemberton approached during the reception, her face glowing with pleasure. "Your Royal Highness, this is absolutely brilliant. I've seen more substantive conversations about education policy and program effectiveness tonight than I typically experience in months of ministry meetings. The displays are providing exactly the kind of detailed information that helps donors understand how their contributions create real change." Lady Thornfield joined them, equally enthusiastic. "My dear, this is remarkable. I've been hosting and attending royal charitable events for decades, and I've never seen donors so engaged with the actual program content. Usually, these gatherings focus primarily on social networking and traditional philanthropy. But tonight, people are really learning about education and discussing how to maximize impact." Even Lord Whitmore, traditionally the most conservative voice in royal protocol discussions, expressed his approval. "The integration of enhanced elements with traditional formats has been seamless, Your Royal Highness. The dignity and effectiveness of the royal approach have been maintained while adding genuine value for attendees." The formal program portion of the evening provided the ultimate test of their collaborative approach. Isabella and Margareta shared presentation duties,
with Margareta providing opening remarks that established the traditional context and historical importance of royal educational support, while Isabella introduced the enhanced elements that would give donors deeper insight into contemporary program impacts. The scholarship recipients who spoke during the formal program were outstanding, sharing personal stories that illustrated both the continuing relevance of educational support and the specific ways that royal patronage had influenced their opportunities. Their presentations were enhanced by visual elements from the interactive displays, creating a comprehensive picture of how individual donations contributed to broader educational improvements throughout the kingdom. The evening's most significant moment came during the fundraising portion, when several major donors announced substantially increased commitments based on their enhanced understanding of program effectiveness. The total funds raised exceeded the previous year's results by nearly 40%, demonstrating that the collaborative approach had indeed achieved its goal of maintaining traditional donor relationships while attracting new support through more engaging and informative presentation methods. As the formal program concluded and guests returned to the reception areas for continued networking, Isabella found herself in conversation with several education ministry officials who were eager to discuss how the royal charitable model might be adapted for their own fundraising efforts. The combination of personal stories, detailed impact data, and social networking opportunities creates multiple ways for donors to connect with the cause, observed Dr. Margaret Stevens, the ministry's Director of Educational Development. Most charitable events focus on just one or two of these elements, but tonight has demonstrated how they can all work together effectively. Minister of Education James Whitfield nodded enthusiastically. What's particularly impressive is how the royal dignity and protocol have been maintained throughout the enhanced format. Often there's concern that more informal or interactive approaches might compromise the gravitas that major donors expect from royal events. But tonight proves that innovation and tradition can coexist beautifully. These conversations continued throughout the remainder of the reception, with donors, ministry officials, and other attendees expressing genuine excitement about both the immediate fundraising success and the potential for this collaborative model to influence other royal charitable initiatives. As the last guests departed and the palace staff began the cleanup process, Isabella found herself in the blue drawing room with Margareta, Alexander, Lady Thornfield, Lord Whitmore, and several other key participants in the planning process. The atmosphere was one of celebration and satisfaction, with everyone recognizing that they had achieved something genuinely significant. "I believe we can call this evening an unqualified success," Margareta said, raising her glass of champagne in a toast. "The fundraising results speak for themselves, but more importantly, we've demonstrated that royal charitable work can evolve and improve while maintaining its essential character and effectiveness." Alexander beamed with pride as he looked between his wife and stepmother. "You've both shown remarkable leadership and collaboration. This event will be remembered not just for its immediate success, but as a model for how royal institutions can adapt thoughtfully to changing times and circumstances." Lord Whitmore, whose approval Isabella had learned to value highly, added his own observations. "The careful balance of innovation and tradition achieved tonight provides a template that could be applied to many other royal activities. We've proven that change doesn't have to mean abandonment of proven practices, but rather enhancement and evolution of existing strengths." Lady Thornfield, whose early support had been so crucial to Isabella's success, smiled warmly as she addressed the group. "What impresses me most is how this collaborative approach has strengthened relationships within the royal family, while also improving our service to the kingdom. Princess Isabella and Queen Margareta have shown that different perspectives and experiences can create something more powerful than either could accomplish independently." As the evening wound down and people began to depart, Isabella found herself alone with Margareta, in the quiet elegance of the blue drawing room. The Queen Regent was reviewing notes from the evening, but she looked up with a genuine smile when she noticed Isabella's approach. "My dear, I owe you an apology," Margareta said quietly. "When you first proposed changes to our charitable events, I responded defensively, rather than collaboratively. I was so concerned about protecting what I had built that I failed to recognize the genuine value in your ideas and the possibility that we could work together to create something even better.
Isabella felt moved by this acknowledgement, understanding how difficult it might be for someone of Margaretta's position and experience to admit error. Your concerns were legitimate, and I should have approached the situation more thoughtfully from the beginning. I learned as much from you as you may have learned from me, and I think that mutual education is what made our collaboration so successful. Margareta nodded thoughtfully. I think you're right, and I think this experience has implications that extend far beyond tonight's gala. We've demonstrated that the monarchy can embrace change and innovation without sacrificing the qualities that make royal institutions valuable and effective. More than that, Isabella said, we've shown that different generations and perspectives within the royal family can work together to strengthen rather than compete with each other. Tonight felt like a true partnership where everyone's contributions were valued and essential. As they prepared to leave the blue drawing room, Margareta paused and looked directly at Isabella. I want you to know that I now see you not just as Alexander's wife or as a princess fulfilling her duties, but as a genuine partner in the work of the monarchy. Tonight has convinced me that the future of royal service is in excellent hands. This recognition felt like the culmination of Isabella's efforts to establish herself as a meaningful contributor to the royal family's work, rather than simply an ornamental addition. The journey from initial resistance through careful diplomacy to genuine collaboration had required patience, strategic thinking, and willingness to learn from others, but the results had validated the effort invested. As Isabella made her way back to her private chambers, she reflected on the lessons of the evening and the broader implications for her future role within the monarchy. The success of the collaborative approach suggested that many other royal activities could benefit from similar partnerships between established wisdom and fresh perspectives, creating opportunities for meaningful innovation that honored tradition while addressing contemporary needs and expectations. More personally, the evening had demonstrated her own growth as both a princess and a political actor within the complex dynamics of royal life. The skills she had developed in building alliances, presenting ideas strategically, and working collaboratively with people who held different viewpoints would serve her well as she assumed greater responsibilities within the royal family and the kingdom. 6 months after the triumphant charity gala, Princess Isabella found herself facing an entirely different kind of challenge that would test not only her newfound collaborative relationship with Queen Margareta, but also her understanding of the delicate balance between public service and personal conviction that defined royal life. The issue emerged from an unexpected source, an investigative report published by the Aldorian Tribune that questioned the effectiveness and transparency of several long-established royal charitable programs. The article, written by veteran journalist Sarah Matthews, had been researching royal charitable activities for over a year, examining financial records, interviewing program beneficiaries, and comparing Aldorian royal philanthropy with international standards for charitable effectiveness. While the tone was respectful and the reporting appeared thorough, the conclusions raised uncomfortable questions about whether some traditional royal charitable approaches were actually achieving their stated objectives. Isabella first learned about the article when Lady Caroline burst into her private study early on a Tuesday morning, holding a copy of the newspaper with an expression of barely contained alarm. Your Royal Highness, I think you need to see this immediately. The Tribune has published an extensive investigation into royal charitable programs, and while it mentions the success of your recent gala innovations, it raises serious questions about several other initiatives. Isabella set down her correspondence and accepted the newspaper, scanning the headline that read, Royal Charity Tradition versus Effectiveness. As she read through the detailed article, she felt her stomach tightening with each paragraph. The reporter had identified several programs that had been operating for decades with minimal oversight, questionable impact measurement, and what appeared to be inefficient use of donated funds. Most troubling was the implication that the royal family's commitment to tradition and protocol might be preventing necessary reforms that could make their charitable work more effective. The article specifically contrasted the innovative success of the recent education gala with other programs that seemed to prioritize ceremony and tradition over measurable outcomes. This is going to create a significant crisis, Caroline observed as Isabella finished reading. The palace will be under enormous pressure to respond.
and there will be demands for comprehensive reviews of all royal charitable activities. Isabella's mind immediately went to Queen Margareta, knowing that many of the criticized programs had been established during her tenure as Queen Consort and later as Queen Regent. The article wasn't personally attacking Margareta, but it was questioning the effectiveness of approaches she had supported and maintained for years. Before Isabella could fully process the implications, her telephone rang. Caroline answered and quickly turned to Isabella with a tense expression. Queen Margareta requests your immediate presence in her private study. She says it's urgent regarding the morning's newspaper coverage. Isabella made her way through the palace corridors with a growing sense of apprehension, uncertain whether Margareta would view this crisis as an opportunity for collaboration or as a threat requiring defensive responses. The past 6 months had built a strong working relationship between them, but this situation would test whether that partnership could survive genuine controversy. When Isabella entered Margareta's study, she found the Queen Regent seated behind her desk with multiple newspapers spread before her, along with what appeared to be files from various charitable programs. Margareta's expression was serious but composed, suggesting she was approaching this crisis with strategic thinking rather than emotional reaction. Isabella, thank you for coming so quickly. I assume you've read the Tribune article? Margareta gestured to a chair across from her desk. Yes, Your Majesty. It's quite comprehensive and raises some significant questions about our charitable programs. Margareta nodded grimly. Indeed it does. And while I disagree with some of the reporter's interpretations, I cannot dispute that she has identified real issues that require our attention. The question now is how we respond in a way that addresses legitimate concerns while protecting the valuable work we do accomplish. Isabella was relieved to hear that Margareta was approaching this as a problem-solving exercise rather than a defensive battle. What are your initial thoughts about the most appropriate response? Well, we have several options, Margareta said, pulling out a legal pad with handwritten notes. We could issue a standard royal statement defending our programs and challenging the article's conclusions. We could request private meetings with the newspaper's editorial board to provide additional context they may have missed. Or we could use this as an opportunity to proactively review and improve our charitable activities. The fact that Margareta was considering proactive improvement rather than simply defensive responses suggested that their collaborative relationship had indeed created space for honest self-evaluation. Which approach do you think would be most effective? Margareta was quiet for a moment, then looked directly at Isabella. If I'm being completely honest, this article has forced me to confront questions I'd been avoiding for years. Some of our programs have continued operating based on tradition and good intentions, rather than demonstrated effectiveness. The success of our collaborative work on the Education Gala has shown me that thoughtful reform can strengthen rather than weaken royal charitable activities. This admission represented a significant shift in Margareta's thinking, and Isabella recognized it as a moment requiring careful handling. Your willingness to consider reforms demonstrates exactly the kind of leadership the kingdom needs. Perhaps we could approach this as an opportunity to apply the collaborative model we developed for the gala to our broader charitable portfolio. That's precisely what I was thinking, Margareta said with evident relief. But such a comprehensive review will require significant time, expertise, and political skill. We'll need to balance genuine reform with respect for programs that are working well, and will need to manage public expectations while conducting thorough evaluations. Isabella felt her excitement building as she realized the scope of what Margareta was proposing. We could establish a Royal Charitable Review Commission with representatives from the palace, the relevant government ministries, independent charity evaluation experts, and perhaps some program beneficiaries. That would provide the expertise and credibility needed for comprehensive assessment. Margareta's eyes lit up with interest, and we could use the Commission's work to develop new standards for royal charitable effectiveness that could guide future initiatives. Rather than simply responding to criticism, we could position the monarchy as a leader in charitable best practices. The conversation continued for over 2 hours as they developed a comprehensive response strategy that would address the Tribune article's concerns, while positioning the royal family as proactive leaders in charitable reform. They agreed that Isabella would take the lead in researching best practices from other monarchies and charitable organizations, while Margareta would handle the delicate political work of building support within the palace and among traditional royal charity supporters. However, their planning was interrupted when Lord Whitmore arrived with an urgent message from the palace press office. The Tribune article had been picked up by international media, and there were already requests for royal responses from newspapers across Europe and beyond. "Your Majesties," Lord Whitmore said with obvious stress, "we're facing significant media pressure for immediate responses. The Palace Press Office is recommending a formal statement defending our charitable programs and challenging the article's methodology." Isabella exchanged glances with Margareta, both recognizing that a defensive response would undermine their plans for proactive reform. "Lord Whitmore," Isabella said carefully, "Queen Margareta and I have been discussing a more comprehensive approach that could turn this crisis into an opportunity for leadership." Lord Whitmore looked skeptical. "Your Royal Highness, with respect, this situation requires immediate damage control. We cannot allow unsubstantiated criticism to damage the monarchy's reputation without strong response." Margareta leaned forward with the authoritative tone she used when making important decisions. "James, the criticism is not entirely unsubstantiated, and a defensive response will only invite further investigation and criticism. Princess Isabella and I have developed a strategy that could demonstrate royal leadership in charitable effectiveness rather than simply defending questionable practices." Over the next hour, they presented their comprehensive reform proposal to Lord Whitmore, showing how proactive review and improvement could transform a potential scandal into a demonstration of royal responsiveness and commitment to genuine service. Initially resistant, Lord Whitmore gradually recognized the political wisdom of their approach. "If we can present this as royal leadership, rather than reaction to criticism," he admitted, "it could indeed strengthen the monarchy's position. But the implementation will require extremely careful management to maintain public confidence throughout the review process." The afternoon brought a flood of additional challenges, as news of the Tribune articles spread through royal circles, government ministries, and charitable organizations throughout the kingdom. Isabella found herself fielding phone calls from donors expressing concern, ministry officials seeking guidance, and charitable partners worried about the implications for their programs. Each conversation required careful diplomacy, as Isabella needed to acknowledge legitimate concerns while building support for the comprehensive review approach without appearing to validate all of the article's criticisms. The political skills she had developed during her gala collaboration with Margareta proved invaluable as she navigated these delicate discussions. The most difficult conversation came from Mrs. Sarcista Pemberton at the Ministry of Education, who was worried that the controversy might affect the successful education programs they had enhanced through their collaborative efforts. "Princess Isabella, there are concerns that a comprehensive review might disrupt programs that are working well in order to address problems with unrelated initiatives." "I understand those concerns," Isabella replied, "but I think our review process can distinguish between programs that need improvement and those that are already achieving their objectives effectively. The goal is to strengthen royal charitable work overall, not to disrupt successful initiatives." By evening, Isabella and Margareta had developed a detailed timeline for implementing their reform strategy. They would announce the establishment of the Royal Charitable Review Commission within 48 hours, positioning it as a proactive royal initiative rather than a response to criticism. The commission would conduct comprehensive evaluations of all major royal charitable programs over 6 months, with interim reports and final recommendations for improvements. Most importantly, they had agreed that their collaborative relationship would serve as the model for how the commission would operate, emphasizing partnership between traditional royal expertise and contemporary charitable best practices. This approach would demonstrate that the monarchy could evolve and improve while maintaining its essential character and effectiveness. As Isabella prepared for bed that evening, she reflected on how dramatically the day's events had tested and ultimately strengthened her partnership with Margareta. Faced with genuine crisis and criticism, they had chosen collaboration and proactive improvement over defensive reactions, demonstrating that their relationship could handle significant stress while producing constructive solutions. The challenge ahead would be implementing their ambitious reform agenda while maintaining public confidence in royal charitable work and managing the complex political dynamics involved in evaluating and improving long-established programs. Success would require all the diplomatic skills, strategic thinking, and collaborative leadership they had developed during their work on the education gala, but applied to a much larger and more complex undertaking. However, Isabella felt confident that their partnership was strong enough to handle these challenges. The crisis had revealed that both she and Margareta shared a fundamental commitment to effective royal service that transcended personal pride or institutional defensiveness. With this foundation, they could work together to transform potential scandal into genuine leadership, demonstrating that the monarchy could be both traditional and progressive, both stable and adaptive. The next morning brought confirmation that their approach was indeed the right one, as early newspaper editorials praised the royal family's announcement of the Charitable Review Commission as an example of responsible leadership. The Tribune's Sarah Matthews, whose original article had triggered the crisis, wrote a follow-up piece commending the royal response and expressing hope that the review would produce meaningful improvements in charitable effectiveness. More significantly, several major donors and charitable organizations had contacted the palace to express support for the review process and offer assistance in developing new standards for royal charitable work. This positive response suggested that their strategy of proactive leadership was indeed resonating with key stakeholders and positioning the monarchy for strengthened rather than damaged relationships with the charitable community. The success of their crisis management approach provided Isabella with deep satisfaction, not just because it had avoided potential damage to the monarchy, but because it demonstrated the power of collaborative leadership in addressing complex challenges. The skills and relationships she had built with Margareta had enabled them to transform a potentially devastating situation into an opportunity for genuine improvement and enhanced credibility. As she began the detailed work of researching charitable best practices and organizing the review commission, Isabella felt grateful for the journey that had brought her to this point. From initial resistance and misunderstanding through careful diplomacy to genuine partnership, her relationship with Margareta had evolved into something that could handle significant challenges while producing meaningful results for the kingdom and the monarchy. 1 year after the establishment of the Royal Charitable Review Commission, Princess Isabella stood in the same grand ballroom where her collaboration with Queen Margareta had first achieved success. But now the space was configured for a very different kind of royal event. Instead of a traditional charity gala, they were hosting the public presentation of the Commission's final report and the launch of the new Royal Charitable Standards framework that would guide all future royal philanthropic activities. The transformation of royal charitable work over the past year had exceeded even Isabella's optimistic expectations. Working together, she and Margareta had overseen a comprehensive evaluation that resulted in the improvement of existing programs, the creation of new initiatives based on demonstrated need, and the establishment of ongoing assessment mechanisms that would ensure continued effectiveness and adaptation. The Commission's work had attracted international attention, with other monarchies and charitable organizations studying the Aldorian model for possible adaptation to their own contexts. More importantly, for Isabella and Margareta, the process had demonstrated that royal institutions could indeed lead by example in addressing social challenges through evidence-based collaborative approaches that honored tradition while embracing innovation. As Isabella reviewed her presentation notes one final time, she reflected on the personal and professional growth that this challenging year had produced. The crisis management skills she had developed during the initial newspaper investigation had evolved into sophisticated capabilities in organizational change, stakeholder management, and public leadership that extended far beyond charitable work into other aspects of royal service. Her relationship with Margareta had also evolved into something neither had anticipated when they first began working together. What had started as a diplomatic collaboration had become a genuine partnership, based on shared values, mutual respect, and complementary skills that enhanced both of their contributions to the monarchy's work. Lady Caroline approached with final attendance figures and media arrangements. Your Royal Highness, we have representatives from over 40 charitable organizations, 15 government ministries, and delegations from 6 other monarchies attending today's presentation. The international interest has been remarkable. It really has, Isabella agreed, feeling both pride and slight nervousness about the level of attention their work had attracted. Have Queen Margareta and Crown Prince Alexander arrived?
Yes, Your Royal Highness.
Queen Margareta is reviewing the exhibition displays with the commission members. and His Royal Highness is meeting with the international delegations in the portrait gallery. The past year had also strengthened Isabella's relationship with Alexander, as he had come to understand and appreciate the significant leadership role she was assuming within the royal family. Initially concerned about potential controversy from the charitable review, he had become one of its strongest supporters as the positive results became apparent and international recognition grew. Isabella made her way to the exhibition area, where Margareta was indeed deep in conversation with Dr. Elizabeth Hamilton, the independent charity expert who had served as the commission's chair. Dr. Hamilton was an internationally respected authority on philanthropic effectiveness who had initially been skeptical about royal charitable work, but had become an enthusiastic advocate for the Aldorian model. "Princess Isabella," Dr. Hamilton said warmly as Isabella joined them. "I was just telling Queen Margareta how remarkable it has been to observe the transformation of these programs over the past year. The combination of royal commitment and professional standards has created something truly innovative." Margareta smiled with genuine satisfaction. "Dr. Hamilton has been instrumental in helping us understand how traditional royal approaches could be enhanced with contemporary best practices. The results speak for themselves." Indeed, they did. The Commission's work had resulted in measurable improvements across virtually every aspect of royal charitable activity. Programs that had been operating with unclear objectives now had specific goals and regular assessment mechanisms. Initiatives that had shown limited impact had been redesigned or replaced with more effective approaches. Most significantly, new programs had been developed based on comprehensive needs assessment and evidence-based design principles. The education initiatives that Isabella and Margareta had first collaborated on had become the flagship example of the new approach. Building on their successful gala innovations, they had created a comprehensive scholarship program with built-in mentoring, career guidance, and community development components that addressed educational access holistically rather than simply providing financial assistance. The results were compelling. Scholarship recipients showed higher completion rates, better career outcomes, and stronger community engagement than participants in traditional programs. More importantly, the program's design allowed for continuous improvement based on participant feedback and outcome measurement, ensuring that it would continue to evolve and improve over time. As the morning progressed and guests arrived for the presentation, Isabella was struck by the diversity of people who had become invested in the royal charitable reform process. Traditional royal supporters were present alongside progressive social activists, government officials, international observers, and representatives from communities that benefited from royal charitable programs. This broad coalition represented one of the most significant achievements of their collaborative approach. By focusing on effectiveness and transparency rather than ideology, they had created space for people with different perspectives to work together toward shared objectives. The process had demonstrated that meaningful social change could emerge from careful, inclusive collaboration rather than confrontational advocacy. Crown Prince Alexander opened the formal presentation with remarks that positioned the royal charitable reforms within the broader context of his vision for the monarchy's future role in Aldorian society. "Today's presentation represents more than improvements to our charitable programs," he said. "It demonstrates the monarchy's commitment to leadership through service, innovation through collaboration, and effectiveness through accountability." Dr. Hamilton then presented the Commission's comprehensive findings, including detailed assessments of previous programs, analysis of international best practices, and recommendations for future development. Her presentation was both scholarly rigorous and accessible to the diverse audience, explaining complex concepts in ways that emphasized practical implications rather than academic theory. The most compelling portion of the presentation came when program beneficiaries shared their experiences with both traditional and reformed royal charitable initiatives. Maria Santos, a young woman who had participated in the enhanced education program, provided particularly powerful testimony about how the comprehensive approach had influenced not just her academic success but her entire life trajectory. "The traditional scholarship program would have helped me pay for university," Maria explained, "but the enhanced program provided mentoring that helped me choose the right courses, internship opportunities that gave me practical experience, and community connections that will support my career for years to come."
It's the difference between receiving assistance and receiving transformation. When Isabella took the podium for her presentation on the collaborative process and lessons learned, she felt the weight of representing not just her own work, but the broader principle that royal institutions could indeed adapt and improve while maintaining their essential character. Our experience over the past year has demonstrated that tradition and innovation are not opposing forces, Isabella began, but rather complementary elements that can strengthen each other when brought together thoughtfully. The success of our charitable reforms reflects the success of our collaborative approach, which honored existing achievements while creating space for meaningful improvement. She went on to describe the specific mechanisms they had developed for ongoing assessment and adaptation, the stakeholder engagement processes that ensured broad input and support, and the governance structures that balanced royal authority with professional expertise and community voice. The response to Isabella's presentation was overwhelmingly positive, with questions from the audience demonstrating genuine interest in how the Aldorian model might be adapted to other contexts. Representatives from other monarchies were particularly interested in the collaborative process between different generations of royal leadership, recognizing similar dynamics within their own institutions. Queen Margherita concluded the formal presentation with remarks that reflected on the broader implications of their work for royal service and social leadership. What we have accomplished together over the past year demonstrates that royal institutions can be both stable and adaptive, both traditional and progressive. By working collaboratively rather than defensively, we have strengthened rather than weakened the monarchy's capacity to serve the kingdom effectively. The afternoon continued with smaller group discussions and networking opportunities that allowed attendees to explore specific aspects of the reforms in greater detail. Isabella found herself in conversation with delegates from the Swedish and Dutch royal families, who were considering similar comprehensive reviews of their own charitable activities. The most impressive aspect of your approach, observed Princess Christina of Sweden, is how you manage to maintain public confidence throughout the review process. Usually, institutional self-examination creates anxiety and speculation, but you seemed to build rather than lose support. Isabella recognized this as an astute observation about one of their most significant achievements. I think the key was positioning the review as proactive leadership rather than response to criticism, and ensuring that stakeholders were involved in developing solutions rather than simply receiving them from royal decree. The conversations throughout the afternoon reinforced Isabella's understanding that their work had implications extending far beyond Aldorian charitable programs. They had developed a model for how traditional institutions could adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining their essential character and public support. As the formal event concluded and guests began to depart, Isabella found herself back in the blue drawing room with Margherita, Alexander, and several key members of the review commission. The atmosphere was one of celebration and satisfaction, but also of recognition that this conclusion was really a beginning. "So, what comes next?" asked Dr. Hamilton, who had agreed to continue working with the royal family as they implemented the new frameworks and assessed ongoing results. "Well, we have commitments to provide annual assessments of program effectiveness," Isabella replied. "And we've established mechanisms for continuous improvement based on changing needs and circumstances. But I think the most important next step is ensuring that this collaborative approach becomes the standard for other royal initiatives beyond charitable work." Alexander nodded enthusiastically. "That's exactly what I was hoping you would say. The success of this process has convinced me that similar approaches could benefit our cultural patronage, environmental initiatives, and even some aspects of constitutional development." This prospect excited Isabella enormously, as it suggested that the collaborative model she and Margherita had developed could indeed transform broader aspects of royal service and modernize the monarchy's approach to its various responsibilities. Margherita, who had been listening thoughtfully to the conversation, added her own perspective. "What strikes me most about our experience is how much we all learned by working together rather than simply defending our individual positions. Isabella brought research skills and fresh perspectives that enhanced my experience-based knowledge, while I was able to provide context and relationships that made her innovations more effective. The result was better than either of us could have achieved independently." As the evening wound down,
Isabella reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her from initial resistance and misunderstanding with Margareta through careful diplomacy to genuine partnership, and finally to collaborative leadership that was attracting international attention and respect. The skills she had developed through this process, from strategic thinking and stakeholder engagement to crisis management and organizational change, would serve her well as she assumed greater responsibilities within the royal family and prepared for her eventual role as queen. More importantly, the relationship she had built with Margareta had created a model for how different generations within the royal family could work together to strengthen rather than compete with each other. Their collaboration had demonstrated that experience and innovation, tradition and progress could enhance rather than undermine each other when brought together through respectful partnership. The success of the royal charitable reforms represented more than improved programs or international recognition. It demonstrated that institutions founded on tradition could indeed lead social change when they approached challenges with openness, collaboration, and commitment to genuine improvement rather than defensive preservation of existing approaches. As Isabella prepared to leave the palace that evening, she felt deeply satisfied not just with what they had accomplished, but with the foundation they had built for future collaboration and continued innovation within the monarchy. The crisis that had initially threatened to damage royal charitable work had instead become the catalyst for transformation that strengthened both the institution and its capacity to serve the kingdom effectively. The lessons learned through this intensive year of collaboration and reform would guide Isabella's approach to royal service for the rest of her life, providing both practical skills and philosophical framework for leadership that honored tradition while embracing necessary change. Most importantly, it had demonstrated that royal service at its best could indeed make meaningful differences in people's lives through thoughtful, collaborative, evidence-based approaches to social challenges. Looking toward the future, Isabella felt confident that the monarchy was well positioned to continue evolving and improving while maintaining the stability and dignity that made royal institutions valuable to the kingdom and its people. The collaborative approach she and Margareta had pioneered would ensure that future changes would be thoughtful rather than reactive, inclusive rather than imposed, and effective rather than merely symbolic.